What's going on, everybody? My name is Calypso, representing the Remnants of Hope gaming community right here within the ESO division of the guild. I am the PvE officer of the guild, and today we're going to be doing a follow-up to my last video, which covered the Dragon Knight class basics as it pertains to tanking. In this video, we're going to be covering the non-class specific skills that a tank might want to take into battle, because there are a lot of them. There are a lot of skills that you can take in to meet the needs of any given situation. This video should hopefully be a little bit shorter than the last one, but we'll be doing the same things. We'll be running down the line, going down the skills that you might want to pick up, as well as the passives that you might want to pick up that are non-class specific. There's a lot of utilitarian uses out there, and so we're going to go over them today. So, hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have an even better understanding of what it means to tank in a very general sense. So, let's kick things right off with the most obvious skill tree here. The one hand and shield skill line. Now, I touched on this a little bit in the last video, but we're going to go a little bit more in depth here. First off, we have the ultimate here, which is shield wall. It's really up to you what morph that you decide to pick here. Personally, I do prefer shield discipline. Automatically block all attacks at no cost for 8 seconds, and your one-handed shield abilities cost nothing while the effect persists. Very, very powerful for things like reapplying taunt or casting any other one of your one-hand shield abilities, which we'll discuss here in a moment. The alternative is Spell Wall, which reflects projectiles cast at you for 7 seconds. That is a little less useful, in my opinion, because we already have another one-hand shield ability that is going to reflect projectiles for us, which, if we cast Shield Discipline, we can cast it for free, which is very, very nice. So that's the ultimate there. Whichever one is up to you. Personally, I do prefer Shield Discipline. Moving on down here, we have a couple of options here. First off, it starts off as Puncture. This is our primary melee our primary melee taunt, regardless of what class you decide to choose to run as your tank. We have two options here after Puncture. There is Ransack and there is Pierce Armor. Now, both options are actually fantastic, depending on the situation that you find yourself in. Now, these days, most tanks within a raid setting, a trial setting, a full group of 12 people, are choosing to take Ransack. And the reason for that is because it's an extremely easy source of minor protection, which is a reduction in damage taken by 8% for 15 seconds, which is the duration of the taunt itself. Apart from that, we get Major Fracture, which reduces the enemy physical resistance by 5280, which is great. So a lot of tanks are choosing to take that for the minor protection, because obviously we like to protect ourselves. Now, the expectation there is that the Major Breach would then come from either one of your healers running Elemental Drain or a DPS that can slot Elemental Drain. By the same token, if you have a free spot on your bar, if you have a flexible spot on any one of your bars, you too can run Elemental Drain as a tank. I've done that before. Very, very niche situations will ask that you do that, but it is an option. But generally speaking, the expectation is that one of your healers is going to be running this. And so at that point, you can take Ransack and get yourself minor protection. The alternative here is Pierce Armor, which does not provide minor protection, but it does provide both Major Fracture and Major Breach. Pierce Armor, I feel, does work best in a dungeon setting, where the likelihood that somebody is going to be able to provide Major Breach through Elemental Drain or anything like that is a little bit lower. It's really up to you which option you choose here. It's very, very situational, but both are very, very good. It's up to you. After that, we have Low Slash. Typically, 9 times out of 10, tanks are going to take Heroic Slash as their morph. This afflicts the enemy with Minor Maim, reduces their damage done by 15%, and you gain Minor Heroism, which grants you 1 ultimate every second and a half for 12 seconds. Very, very good for our ultimate generation, regardless of the class that you play. The alternative here is Deep Slash, which sweeps the enemy. It does not give you the Minor Heroism, but it does afflict everybody that it hits with Minor Maim, reduces their damage done by 15% for 12 seconds. So, really, really good for trash pools. So again, this is another one where it's kind of up to you which one that you decide to take. It's very, very situational. Both are very, very good. 9 times out of 10, though, as I said, a tank would take Heroic Slash, because higher ultimate generation means higher uptime on things like Aggressive Warhorn, the ultimate found in the Alliance War Assault skill line. Starts off as Warhorn, you morph that to Aggressive Horn, but we'll get to that in a little bit here. Moving on after that, we have Defensive Posture. Again, this is one of those situations where the morph that you take is entirely dependent on your situation, but personally, I do enjoy Defensive Stance more. You get a very, very nice damage shield first off. After that, you reflect the next harmful direct damage projectile cast at you. That can occur once per cast of Defensive Stance. Again, this here is the reason that I do prefer Shield Discipline over Spell Wall, because we already have skills that can reflect projectiles within this skill tree. And also, it's free whenever Shield Discipline is active, so things like Defensive Stance count among that. Any one of these can be free, actually. So we do like that. And while you have the shield equipped, the amount of damage you can block is increased by 10%, and the cost of blocking is reduced by 10%. We do enjoy that. So personally, I do enjoy Defensive Stance more so than the alternative, which is Absorb Missile. The difference being that whenever you absorb a projectile attack, you are healed. Most tanks, or most classes of tank, have their own very, very powerful self-sustaining heal. In the case of the Dragon Knight, as I touched on last week, that comes in the form of Green Dragon Blood. For a Necromancer tank, it might be Hungry Scythe. For a Templar, it might be literally any one of their heals, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. So it's really up to you which morph of Defensive Posture that you take, but personally, I enjoy Defensive Stance more. As you can see, the one-hand skill line is pretty well balanced. It's all very, very situational, but no matter what skill you take, you're not really going to take a bad one, quote-unquote, an objectively bad one. They're all very, very good. So after that, we have Shield Charge. This is a very good gap closer, but the situations in which you need to close the gap quickly are very few and far in between, so I do not run Shield Charge. As you can see, I don't even have it leveled up, but it is nice to have. It's more useful for things like PvP, where whenever you bump into somebody with it, you're stunning them, you can close the distance, you can get some kills on them. It's very handy for that. After that, we have Power Bash, which I don't use at all as a tank. Nobody should ever use it. Now, into our passives. You'll want to take all of these. Every single one of these. Fortress reduces the stamina cost of your one-hand and shield abilities by 15% and reduces the cost of blocking by 36%. Definitely take it. We like it. Sword and Board increases your weapon damage by 5% and the amount of damage you can block by 20%. Take it. We like it. Deadly Bash improves your standard bash attacks. Your bash attacks gain an additional 400 weapon and spell damage, which we don't care about, but what we do care about is the fact that bashing costs 40% less stamina. As a tank, you're on the front lines. Often, you're going to have to interrupt the boss. This is very handy for that. Our bash is reliable. After that, we have Deflect Bolts. Increases the amount of damage you can block from projectiles and ranged attacks by 14%. Obvious, we want that. And after that is Battlefield Mobility. Reduces the movement speed penalty of Bracing. Bracing is a new term that Zos came up with. Basically refers to blocking. But you move faster while you're blocking. So, if I did not have the passives taken here, if I did not have the passives, I'd be doing this a lot slower, obviously. Alright, moving on after that. So that's the one-hand and shield skill line there. Pretty self-explanatory as far as tanking goes. Every tank should be running Sword and Board on at least one of their bars. The defensive passives and capabilities that Sword and Board provides are pretty much, it's a non-argument. Take it. Now, after that, we have Destruction Staff. Most tanks run on the back bar 9 times out of 10 the Frost Staff. And the reason for that is because of the nature of the passives that you receive when you run the Frost variant of the Destruction Staff. And the reason are the following. It's mostly related to your passives. First off, we have Penetrating Magic. Your Destruction Staff abilities ignore 10% of the enemy's spell resistance. Very good. Elemental Force increases your chance to apply the Burning, Concussion, and Chilled status effects by 100%. Chilled means the enemies are slowed, so it's very good in trash pools. Keeps people from running away as fast as they otherwise would. After that, we have Ancient Knowledge. This is where things change up a little bit depending on the type of staff that you have. But if you have a Frost staff, it reduces the cost of blocking by 36% and increases the amount of damage you block by 20%. This is on your Frost staff bar. So very, very, very good. This passive right here is a big reason why Frost Staff is the quote-unquote tanking staff, is for perks like Ancient Knowledge and how things change up there. And after that, we have Destruction Expert. When you kill an enemy with a Destruction Staff ability, you restore 3,600 Magicka. Kind of handy for trash packs in the off chance that an enemy dies in, and this is the reason why we take a Destruction Staff at all, Wall of Elements. Now, typically, a tank is going to morph that to Elemental Blockade for 2 reasons. Unstable Wall of Elements is the damage morph, and it lasts for only 10 seconds. Elemental Blockade is not necessarily damage morph, but it lasts for 14 seconds. That is what we want. We want this one. Now, why do we use this ability at all? Why do we have a staff at all for this ability? Well, let me diverge a little bit here. Let me bring up one of my staves, because I don't have them currently equipped. Let's look at the Ice Staff of Torug's Pact. So, as you can see here, I have 2 things. One, I have it traded as Infused. Increases the weapon enchantment effect by 25% and reduces its cooldown by 50%. And then the enchantment itself is the Crusher enchantment, which reduces the target's physical and spell resistance by 2027 for 5 seconds. So if we just equip that real quick, and I will throw on Elemental Blockade. The idea being, you will throw this thing out, and the target that is within that has their physical and spell resistances reduced even further. This is on top of things like Pierce Armor, Elemental Drain, Alkosh proc, reducing resistances. It all works to do that, and that's the reason why tanks run a staff on the back bar. Specifically for this one skill, Wall of Elements, Elemental Blockade, proccing the Crusher enchant, and benefiting from being infused. So, that is the reason why for that. And as I mentioned before, a tank can take Elemental Drain. So, you want to take Wall of Elements and Elemental Drain, weakness to elements, morph that, and there you go. Now, you'll notice I don't have Tri-Focus here. You'll see some tanks run that, some tanks don't. It's really up to you, but here's why I don't. When you have a Frost Staff equipped with the Tri-Focus perk taken, fully charged Frost Staff heavy attacks taunt the enemy to attack you for 15 seconds and grant a damage shield that absorbs 1407 damage. And while a Frost Staff is equipped, blocking costs Magicka instead of stamina. I do not like this perk. I have fallen out of favor with it. I removed it on just about all of my tanks that I remembered to. The reason is this. Number 1, we already have a ranged taunt that does the job of being a ranged taunt, and this takes us into the Undaunted skill line. Inner Fire, which you would morph to Inner Rage. This is our primary ranged taunt. We don't need the Frost Staff to do that. That's number 1. Number 2, as you can see here, heavy attacking results in taunting them, right? So that means if you happen to be the off tank in a situation, you cannot heavy attack with your Frost Staff to gain resources back because you will taunt the enemy. You're just SOL. Not a fan of that. And number 3, while a Frost Staff is equipped, blocking costs Magicka instead of stamina. Not a fan of that. I don't want to rely on my Magicka to block, particularly because as a tank, as any class of tank, you're not going to have a very, very, very large Magicka pool. And you don't want to use it for things like blocking. So, there's that. It's really up to you. If it works for you and you're enjoying it, by all means take it. But personally, those are the reasons why I do not take Tri-Focus anymore. Now, is it just the Frost Staff that you would run? 9 times out of 10? Yes. But you can run the Lightning Staff on the back bar. Now, these situations in where you might run that is if you are participating in a heavily stamina-focused raid composition where sources of off-balance are fairly few and far in between. Now, what is off-balance? If you are unclear about that, I'll give you the very, very short explanation. Shock damage procs concussion. Concussion results in off-balance. Off-balance is it's either a 14-second debuff with a 7-second cooldown or a 7-second debuff with a 14-second cooldown. You'll have to double-check me on that. I don't quite remember. But when a target is rendered off-balance, all heavy attacks on that target restore double the amount of resources. And if you have stamina DPS in your group, if they have the perk, I think it's Exploiter, yes. Stamina DPS typically have the Exploiter perk, increases your damage done against off-balance enemies by 10%. So, stamina DPS are benefited in that respect. Off balance, as I said, is triggered by shock damage, which triggers concussion, which triggers off balance. Now, on a boss, any number of players can heavy attack the boss and receive the benefits of off balance for the duration of that debuff. Now, if it's on just a miscellaneous mob and somebody heavy attacks it, then they have removed off balance. They have taken the double resources. But on elite enemies and on bosses, any number of players can heavy attack or attack and receive the benefits of off balance. So that is where you would take a lightning staff as a tank. And obviously as a flame staff, that's damage oriented. We don't run it ever. We don't need it. So that is the destruction staff. Now, as I mentioned in the last video, there are some tank builds that will run a resto staff on the back bar. Not very many of them, but the ones that do primarily are ultimate focused. And this is for casting things like Life Giver or Light's Champion, which have you. Very rarely is that going to happen, but I just wanted to put it out there. But for the most part, you can ignore it. Now, let's move into the armor trees. Light armor. Sometimes it's really up to you as a tank how you approach this. You may hear things like 5-1-1. What does this refer to? Well, this refers to 5 pieces of your specified weight class. For Magicka DPS, that might be light armor, stamina DPS, medium armor, and then as a tank, heavy armor, right? So those are the 5 pieces of that weight class that most benefit your role, right? The 1 and 1 refer to 2 pieces, each belonging to the other weight classes. So on a tank, 5-1-1 would mean 5 heavy, 1 medium, and 1 light. That's what that means. The purpose of this is to benefit from passives in the Undaunted skill line, Undaunted Metal. Increases your max health, stamina, and magicka by 2% per type of armor, heavy, medium, light, that you have equipped. So you would run 5-1-1 to get the maximum 6% bonus to your max health, stamina, and magicka. That is up to you if you want to do that. Personally, though, I prefer to run all heavy armor for the increased resistances. That is something, again, that has come with experience. I don't necessarily rely on the extra resources that Undaunted Metal might provide, and it's easier for me to manage because not caring about weight class apart from it being heavy makes gear organization a lot easier. I gotta be honest. So that's very nice. But if you do decide to focus on things like 5-1-1, then you'll begin to care about these passives here. For example, Grace reduces the effectiveness of snares applied to you by 2% per piece of light armor worn, so that would just be 2%, which is nice. Evocation increases your magicka recovery by 4% for each piece of light armor. Again, very, very nice. And spell warding, spell resistances go up for each piece of light armor equipped. So if you have 1 piece of light armor, you're getting benefited by these, which is always nice. The last 2 here require you to wear 5 pieces, so you can ignore them. It is the same deal with medium armor. Dexterity, weapon critical. You don't need to worry about that too much, but it's always nice whenever you're hacking and slashing away with your sword. Windwalker increases your stamina recovery by 4% per piece of medium armor equipped. This is nice, so if you, again, are running 5-1-1, Windwalker benefits you. Improved sneak, again, as a tank, we're not really sneaking, so you don't have to worry about that. And once again, these last 2 here depend on you wearing 5 pieces of medium armor. And then obviously there's the active skill Evasion. Shroud yourself in mist to gain major evasion, but this requires 5 pieces of medium armor. Same with light armor and annulment, so don't worry about those. But the first 3 in both of those lines will benefit you if you are running 5-1-1. Finally, we get into heavy armor. Obviously, take all of these. I don't necessarily need to go into detail, but I will anyway. Physical and spell resistance goes up for each piece of armor equipped. Take it. Constitution, health recovery for each piece of armor. Go up. Juggernaut, max health. Revitalize, magicka or stamina, your heavy attacks restore goes up by 25%. Take it. Rapid mending increases your healing received by 8%. This is all tank stuff. We like it. Take it all. Now, the active skill is Unstoppable, and I like this skill a lot. I have been using it a lot over the past few months. The typical morph that you would take it is Unstoppable Brute. Intensify your physical presence to gain major resolve, increasing your physical and spell resistance by 5280 for 20 seconds. While this effect persists, each piece of heavy armor worn decreases the cost of break free by 5%. So what does that result in? Well, I'm wearing 7 pieces of heavy armor, so break free is reduced in cost by 35%. It's very, very nice. Also grants you immunity to knockback and disabling effects for 6 seconds, but reduces your movement speed by 65% for the duration. The difference between Immovable and Unstoppable Brute is that each piece of heavy armor worn increases the amount of damage you can block, but also increases the snare strength. We don't necessarily need another increase in the amount of damage that you can block. Again, this is something that's really, really up to you, but personally, I prefer Unstoppable Brute. Now, the interesting thing about this skill is that it is another source of major resolve, which means if you are a Dragon Knight and running this skill, you do not need to run things like Spiked Armor, Hardened Armor, Volatile Armor, because Unstoppable provides the major resolve that this skill would provide. Now, what kind of situations would I use Unstoppable? There are a handful of them, actually. Any situation in which an enemy attack could knock you back or stun you, I like to throw out Unstoppable and just completely negate that effect. One very, very good example of this is when I am tanking the axes in Aetherian Archives, and I'll throw up a clip here. If I throw out Unstoppable, that means their heavy attacks do not stun me, which is very, very, very nice. A very fun combo, a very useful combo that I like for Aetherian Archives as the axe tank is to throw out Unstoppable and then follow that up actually with Meditate, which would otherwise be morphed into Deep Thoughts. And we'll get into that in a minute. But yeah, I really like Unstoppable for situations like that. In Sunspire, I absolutely adore Unstoppable for tanking the Sench Rots that pounce on you. You just throw that out, and you do not even have to block. You won't move. You won't do nothing. You can just keep doing what you're doing, and they can pounce on you all day. Now, you might think that the movement speed penalty is a burden on you. No pun intended. And if you had to move around a lot, it would be. But as a tank, a lot of times you're not moving all of that much. So it's not really much of a hindrance to you to have your movement speed reduced like that because you're not moving. You're standing your ground. You're tanking. So I like it a lot for those situations. With practice, you'll learn over time which enemies have what abilities that can knock you on your butt and how much you might value something like Unstoppable in those situations. But I like it for that. Very, very useful skill for things like that. Okay, after that we have Vampire within World. Now here's the deal about Vampire. As per the upcoming changes with Greymoor, there is no longer any reason whatsoever for a tank to become a vampire. If those changes stick, which they more or less will, there is no longer any reason for a tank to become a vampire. So you can take it off now or you can keep it. It's really up to you. But in lieu of that, within about another month or so, 2 months, it's going to be irrelevant. So I'm not even going to go into it right now. So don't bother becoming a vampire. You don't need it. You really don't need it anymore. Moving on after that, we have Fighters Guild. Fighters Guild has a handful of useful skills, the first of which is Circle of Protection. This is yet another source of minor protection, and it gives you minor endurance. So your damage is reduced by 8%, and your stamina recovery goes up by 10%. Now, in the case of this, I have Turn Evil, which fears enemies for 2 seconds, which is very, very nice. But you'll probably want to take Ring of Preservation if you're going to take this at all, because it heals you and allies, but it's much shorter. The rune itself is much shorter. It's 8 seconds versus 20 seconds. So it's really, really up to you. Now, the cool thing about this ability is that it's going to stack quite well with class abilities, such as the Dragon Knight, as Green Dragon Blood, because you gain major endurance. So stamina recovery goes up by 20%, and with Ring of Preservation or Turn Evil, it goes up by another 10%, which is very, very, very nice. We like that. So, Circle of Protection, morph it to whatever one you want. Very handy for fights where you need to sustain, maybe dodge a lot, things like that. I like it for that. After that, Expert Hunter, Trap Beast, Silver Dawnbreaker. Those are all DPS abilities and ultimates. We don't care about them as a tank. If you're on any other class than Dragon Knight, you will want to take Silver Bolts and morph it to Silver Leash, because that is your source of leashing. That is how you would leash enemies to you, is by leveling that up, taking Silver Bolts, morphing it to Silver Leash, and that is what you would use to pull enemies towards you. I am on my DK. DKs have their own innate class ability as a leash, so I have not taken Silver Bolts. Passives, Intimidating Presence is quest specific, so definitely take that. Slayer, weapon damage goes up by each fighter's guild ability slotted. It's irrelevant to me as a DK because I do not have silver bolts, but it might be relevant if I decide to take Circle of Protection at any one point. And Banish the Wicked, you generate 9 ultimate when you kill an undead, Daedra, or werewolf. Absolutely take this because sometimes you will get the final blow on people in a trash pack, and that'll be helpful for you. And Skill Tracker and Bounty Hunter is more damage oriented, and Bounty Hunter allows you to accept bounty quests from the Fighters Guild in Cyrodiil, kind of irrelevant to PvE tanking. So there's that. After that, we have the Mages Guild. Now, the one skill on a lot of tanks that they're going to want to take, particularly the DK, is Equilibrium, and morph that to Balance. Balance sacrifices 5,100 health in exchange for 3,000 of Magicka. It's right off the bat. It's instant. After the exchange is complete, you gain Major Resolve for 30 seconds, yet another source of Major Resolve. You can see how many options a tank has at their disposal depending on the situation. The exchange also reduces your healing done and damage shield strength by 50% for 4 seconds, which sounds pretty severe, but again, it's only 4 seconds, and the amount of healing and the amount of shielding that's going to be granted to you by your healers, by yourself, regardless of the class of tank that you're on, this is completely negligible. So, this ability is very, very handy for restoring Magicka on the fly, and I use it quite a lot on my DK and other classes of tanks. There you go. Let's just expand our Magicka here. So, using that to get a bunch of Magicka back. And because it grants you Major Resolve, it once again means that on a DK, you don't have to run things like Spiked Armor, Hardened Armor, Volatile Armor. On a Necromancer, you don't have to run Bone Shield, for example, if you are running Balance. But on a Necromancer, you might be running the alternative morph, which is Spell Symmetry. And I will touch on that next whenever I speak about Necro tanking and those class abilities there. So, as a tank, that's the only skill here you really want to take and have in the back bar there, or on your back pocket, I should say, is Equilibrium. And 9 times out of 10, unless you're a Necromancer, you're going to want to morph that to Balance. The rest of these passives, much like the Fighters Guild, Persuasive Will benefits you when you're questing, which is cool. Reduces the Magicka and health cost of your Mages Guild abilities by 15%, so the health cost goes down from 6,000 with regards to Balance to 5,100, which is nice. Everlasting Magic increases the duration of your Mages Guild abilities by 20%. This benefits things like Balance with regard to Major Resolve. Goes up, you have Major Resolve for 30 seconds, which is very nice. And then the rest of these we don't have to worry about here. Psijic Order. Psijic Order has 1 or 2 abilities that a tank might take, depending on the situation. The very last one, Meditate. Focus your body and mind into a meditative state, healing for 1368 health and restoring 1200 Magicka and stamina every 1 second. You will remain in a meditative state until you toggle this ability off or are interrupted. The morph of that we would take is Deep Thoughts, and I'll show that on the screen here now. Should be pretty obvious why we take Deep Thoughts. This is very, very good for getting your resources back, and as I mentioned before, I do like to combo that with the Heavy Armor active skill Unstoppable, which means I'm channeling Meditate Deep Thoughts, and I won't get knocked on my butt because I have hit Unstoppable. Very, very handy for that. If you do choose to run Meditate and Deep Thoughts, you are then going to want to take these passives. Concentrated Barrier. While you have a Psijic Order ability slotted and are bracing, blocking, you gain a damage shield that absorbs 2,500 damage. This damage shield recharges back to full strength after you spend 10 seconds not bracing. So you would take Meditate, Deep Thoughts, and you'll have another little bubble here while you are running it. And then finally, we have Deliberation. While you are casting or channeling a Psijic Order ability, you gain Major Protection, reducing your damage taken by 30%. So you'll want to take these two for sure if you're running a Psijic Order ability as a tank. 9 times out of 10, it's just going to be Meditate, or you can take Undo, which is the ultimate, and you would morph that to Temporal Guard. The entire reason a tank would have that ultimate sitting on their back bar is for the passive Minor Protection, yet another source of Minor Protection. But, as I said before, a lot of tanks are running Ransack for the Minor Protection nowadays, so Undo, Temporal Guard has kind of fallen out of favor. But your primary options otherwise are going to be Meditate, Deep Thoughts, and then these last 2 passives which would feed into that. Thieves Guild, irrelevant for tanking, whatever. After that, we have Undaunted. All of these skills here serve some sort of purpose at one point or another. You as the tank could run Overflowing or Sanguine Altar, whichever morph that you want of Blood Altar. It really just depends on what fits your style here. It's a nice little bit of health regen. If a healer isn't running it, you can run it. It's really up to you if you have a space on your bar. Shadow Silk is another option that a tank could run, the morph of Trapping Webs. You would take this if you are in a primarily stamina composition raid. That way Shadow Silk is providing an extra bit of damage for your ranged stamina DPS. Get some more poison damage on the boss. We'd like that. As I mentioned before, Inner Fire is going to be morphed to Inner Rage for the guaranteed synergy rather than Inner Beast where it's only at 50% and it converts into a stamina ability, which we don't like. But this is our ranged taunt. Absolutely put points into this. Do it first, I would say. And then after that, we have Bone Shield. I have elected to morph that to Bone Surge, and the primary reason for that is because whenever my allies synergize with me, whenever I have Bone Surge up, they get Major Vitality. So they have increased healing while they're up on top of my healing. And very rarely a tank will take Necrotic Orb to supply resources to their allies. There are very, very few situations where a tank might do that, but it is there. But primarily focus on these first four. The first two that I would take, if you have the option, are Inner Rage, Inner Fire, and Bone Shield, Bone Surge. I would concentrate on those two. You're going to be running those more often than anything else out of the Undaunted skill line. And then obviously you take these two passives. We already spoke about Undaunted Metal, but there is Undaunted Command. Activating an ally synergy restores 4% of your max health, stamina, and magicka. And as you can see on my current bonuses here, the more synergies you have, the more resources you restore. Absolutely take Undaunted Command. After that, we have the Alliance War skill line. In the Assault tree, you are 100% going to want to take Warhorn and morph that to Aggressive Horn. This is the primary ultimate of any tank, regardless of your class. It increases your group's max magicka and stamina by 10% for 30 seconds, but more importantly, you and your allies gain Major Force, increases their crit damage by 15% for 10 seconds. The more often you have this up and the more often you can use it, the more you're benefiting your allies and the more hurting they're putting on the boss. Rapid Maneuvers primarily for Cyrodiil, but it's nice if you're questing in the overworld, you can have that. After that, we have another self-heal, if you choose to take it. Resolving Vigor is the self version of the heal, the selfish version. Let Loose a Battle Cry. You heal for 6,500 health over 4 seconds. Pretty nice, pretty nice. It's up to you whether or not you want to take it or not. The alternative morph just heals everybody else, but for less, so it's really up to you. After that, we have Caltrops, which is just another form of AoE slow. Reduces the movement speed of enemies. I spoke about this briefly in the last video, where if there are enemy mobs that are gunning for you, you want to slow them down, you can throw that out. If you don't have another class-specific slow, Caltrops is an option. And Caltrops, actually, if you take Razor Caltrops, which for PvE purposes, a DPS or a tank will, it does provide Major Fracture, which is very nice, a reduction in physical resistance. And then after that, we have Magicka Detonation. This is primarily DPS oriented, and then these passives here are really only effective in Cyrodiil. So, the primary abilities as a PvE tank that you're going to want to focus on here are Warhorn, morphing it to Aggressive Warhorn, and Vigor, morphing it to whichever one of the two that you decide. It's really up to you. Those are the two most important ones here as a PvE tank. After that, in the support skill line, there is Barrier. I have chosen to morph that to Replenishing Barrier. The reason for that is Sustain. Number one, you're benefiting allies with a damage shield, which is about 13k damage for yourself and all of your allies that you hit with it. Each time a ward dissolves, you restore 4 ultimate and gain 1000 magicka. This is fantastic for resource sustain. And with regards to a Dragon Knight, if I had to choose between Magma Shell and Replenishing Barrier when it comes to shielding my allies, it is always going to be Replenishing Barrier over that. Sustains them, sustains me, everybody's happy. After that, you're definitely going to want to take Purge and morph that to Efficient Purge. As a Dragon Knight, we have very few options in terms of cleansing ourselves, so Purge is very, very helpful here, but it's also very expensive, so absolutely pick that up and morph that to Efficient Purge. And then after that, we have Guard. This is used very, very rarely. It's very, very situational, but sometimes while tanking, you might want to protect somebody else. Maybe that person is dealing with another damaging mechanic that is specific to that boss. or maybe you are. Somebody's guarding you. It can go either way. As a tank, you'll want to take Mystic Guard, because you and your bonded ally also gain minor vitality, which increases your healing received. So that is the morph that you would want to take if you're using this as a tank, helping out, protecting somebody, maybe a healer, maybe a DPS, it doesn't really matter. But it's up to you, but it's very, very situational when you might want to use Guard and then Mystic Guard. And then after that, we have Revealing Flare and Siege Shield. This is specifically for Cyrodiil, and then your passives, once again, are specifically for Cyrodiil. And then there's the racials. The racials are specific to your chosen race, so that's obvious. And then crafting. This goes for any class, regardless of your role. You are absolutely going to want to take Alchemy and max out Medicinal Use, Chemistry, and Laboratory Use. You're definitely going to want to max those out so you can be self-sustaining in terms of potions, but first off, definitely take Medicinal Use. The effects of potions are 30% longer. And Chemistry, if you're crafting things for yourself, you produce 3 extra potions, which is very nice. Coupled with that, Provisioning, you're going to want to take Gourmand, max that out, adds to the duration of any eaten food. Same with Chef, if you're creating your own food, creates 1 extra serving. Regardless of your class, your role, what have you, I recommend taking Gourmand, Chef, and Medicinal Use, and Chemistry, for sure. All right, that about covers it for the non-class specific skills that you would want to focus on as a tank. Hope you learned a little bit something here from this video, and if you have any questions after the fact, you can leave them in the thread down below. Next time, we will go over useful tanking sets, and yeah, the sets, that's really all that's left to talk about at this point, or what the kinds of sets that you may want to look out for and what kind of situations you may want to wear those sets in. So, I am Calypso. Thank you very, very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.